My name is David Klein, and on December 14th, 2018, my entire understanding of life, death, and faith changed forever. For more than 3 decades, I served as a rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My days were filled with studying and teaching the Torah, counseling my congregation, and ensuring that our traditions were upheld. I came from a long line of Jewish scholars, men who had dedicated their lives to scripture and faith. My father and grandfather were both respected leaders in their own communities, and I always believed I was walking the same righteous path. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. It was a cold Friday morning in December, just before Shabbat. I was in my study, preparing a sermon on the strength of faith in times of hardship. Snow had begun to fall outside, covering the streets in a thick, silent blanket. As I sipped my tea, a dull ache crept down my left arm, something I had ignored for weeks, dismissing it as simple stress. But this time, it was different. The ache turned into an unbearable pressure in my chest, like a crushing weight pressing down on me. A cold sweat broke across my skin as the room spun around me. I tried to call out for my wife, Sarah, but my voice barely escaped my lips before my knees buckled. The last thing I remember was Sarah's panicked voice calling my name as everything faded to black. When the paramedics arrived, my heart had already stopped. I later learned that I had suffered a massive heart attack, and for nearly 20 minutes, I was clinically dead. They worked frantically to revive me, shocking my chest over and over again as my body lay lifeless in the back of the ambulance. But while my body was unresponsive, my soul was somewhere else entirely. At first, I felt myself floating above the scene, looking down at my own body. I could see Sarah sobbing, her hands gripping the fabric of my shirt. I could hear the paramedics shouting medical commands, see the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. But I felt no pain, only a strange sense of detachment, as if I was simply an observer. And then, just as quickly as I had left my body, I was pulled into something far beyond anything I had ever imagined. I was being pulled through a tunnel, but it wasn't like any tunnel I had ever seen before. It was filled with a radiant, pure light, brighter than the sun, yet it didn't hurt my eyes. There was a warmth to it, a presence that made me feel completely exposed, but also deeply loved. As I moved forward, I began to see my life flash before me, not just as memories, but as if I were reliving them. I could feel everything I had ever done, every conversation, every moment of joy and sorrow. But what struck me the most was that I wasn't just experiencing my own emotions, I was feeling the emotions of those I had impacted. I saw a moment from my childhood when I had mocked another boy for misunderstanding a passage in Hebrew school. I had long forgotten about it, but now I could feel the humiliation and hurt that child had carried for years. I saw myself delivering sermons with conviction, but I could also sense the hidden pride behind my words, the times I had spoken more to showcase my knowledge than to truly guide my congregation. I watched as people in my synagogue sought answers about faith, about God, about life after death, and I saw how I had dismissed their doubts instead of truly listening. The weight of these realizations crushed me. It wasn't judgment in the way I had imagined. It was a painful truth being laid bare before me. And then I found myself standing in an endless, vast space, stretching far beyond what I could comprehend. The light was no longer just around me. It was before me, in the form of a presence so overwhelmingly powerful that I fell to my knees. I didn't have to ask who it was. I knew. Every fiber of my being recognized this presence. And yet, my mind resisted. It couldn't be. Jesus, the very name I had spent my entire life rejecting, dismissing, arguing against. But there he was, radiant, full of love and undeniably real. I wanted to look away, to deny what was happening, but I couldn't. His presence was unlike anything I had ever known. Pure, holy, completely overwhelming, yet filled with a love so deep it pierced through me. My entire life, I had studied scripture, debated theology, prided myself on my understanding of God, and yet, in this moment, I realized I had never truly known him. Then he spoke my name, David. It wasn't just a sound. It was like his voice went straight into my soul. It was filled with sorrow, but not anger. A sorrow that longed for me to understand what I had missed. He told me, "You have studied about me, but you have never known me." Those words shattered everything I thought I knew. It was as if my entire life had been spent looking at the truth, but never seeing it. I had read the prophecies, I had debated the scriptures, but I had never opened my heart to the possibility that Jesus was the Messiah we had been waiting for. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to explain why I had rejected him for so long. But deep down, I knew I had no excuse. I had refused to see, and as that realization sank in, the light around me shifted. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in that glorious presence. Instead, I was looking at something so terrifying, so horrific, that my soul trembled. I saw hell. It was not a metaphor. It was not some abstract concept or a place of mere separation from God. It was real, and it was worse than anything I could have ever imagined. Before me stretched a vast, endless darkness, yet within it there was fire, raging, consuming, unrelenting flames. But this fire was unlike anything on earth. It wasn't just burning the flesh, it was burning the soul. And in the midst of it, I heard something that will stay with me forever. The screams, wailing, agonized cries of souls who had come to the terrible realization that they had rejected the truth. Their suffering wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, emotional, eternal. I saw people reaching out, as if begging for mercy, but there was none. I recognized leaders, scholars, teachers, people who had devoted their lives to religion, just as I had, but they had denied the truth. Some of them had even misled others, convinced that they were right, that they were doing what was best. But now they understood too late. Too late. Those words echoed in my mind. And then Jesus spoke again. "This is the path you were on." His voice was not cruel. It was filled with sorrow. He had never wanted this for me. He had reached for me so many times throughout my life, but I had refused to listen. I had chosen my own way, and now he was showing me what that choice had led to. I wanted to look away, to shut out the sight before me, but I couldn't. The weight of what I was seeing crushed me. I had been so sure of myself, so confident in my understanding of God, but in reality, my pride had blinded me. I had spent decades rejecting Jesus, believing I was protecting the faith of my ancestors. But now, standing in the presence of absolute truth, I realized I had been protecting nothing but my own stubbornness. I turned back to Jesus, desperate, pleading silently for another chance. And in that moment, I saw something I will never forget. His eyes, they were not filled with condemnation. but with deep sorrow and even deeper love. I could feel it. He had never stopped loving me, never stopped calling me. Even in my rejection, he had still been reaching for me. Then, everything around me shifted again. The flames, the darkness, the torment, it all vanished. Suddenly, I was surrounded by something beautiful, radiant beyond words. I saw a great multitude of people, clothed in light, singing in unison before a throne that radiated pure holiness. I knew without being told, this was heaven. This was where I was meant to be. This was what Jesus had died to give us. And then he spoke again. Your life has been preserved for a purpose. Before I could even process what was happening, everything rushed away like a fading dream, and I felt myself falling backward, fast, like being pulled through time itself. Then, with a violent gasp, I woke up. I was back in my body. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital burned my eyes, and the first thing I heard was the frantic beeping of monitors. My chest ached like it had been crushed, and my entire body felt weak. Nurses were shouting, and then I saw her. Sarah. She was standing by my bedside, tears streaming down her face as she gripped my hand. I was alive. In the days that followed, I barely spoke. I wasn't just recovering physically. I was trying to comprehend what I had just experienced. Had it been real, my mind wanted to rationalize it, but my soul knew the truth. I had seen Jesus. I had seen hell. I had seen heaven. And I had been given a second chance. Then came the hardest part, telling people. Sarah was the first. She listened in stunned silence as I told her everything. The tunnel, the life review Jesus, the suffering souls in hell, and the beauty of heaven. When I finished, she just sat there, gripping my hand. And then she asked me the question that would change everything. What are you going to do now? I knew there was only one answer. I couldn't stay silent. I had spent my entire life preaching what I thought was truth, but now I had seen the fullness of it, and I had no choice but to share it. At first, I tried to be careful, gently bringing up my experience to close friends and members of my congregation. The reactions were mixed. Some listened with quiet curiosity, their eyes filled with questions they were too afraid to voice. Others dismissed it outright, saying it must have been a hallucination brought on by my heart attack. But the hardest reaction of all came from the synagogue board. Word spread quickly about what I had been saying, and soon I was called into a meeting. Men I had known for decades, men who had once respected me, now looked at me with suspicion, even anger. They demanded to know if the rumors were true. Had I really embraced Jesus as the Messiah? Was I now preaching a faith that they saw as betrayal? I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever I said next would change my life forever. And then I told them the truth. The reaction was immediate. Outrage, disbelief, condemnation. I was accused of betraying my people, of being deceived, of losing my mind. Within a week, I was forced to resign from the synagogue I had served for over 30 years. Friends I had considered family cut me off. My own children, Daniel and Rebecca, begged me to reconsider, to stop talking about Jesus before I destroyed our family's reputation. I had lost everything, but even in the midst of my grief, I felt peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just following tradition, I was following truth. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. I had spent decades surrounded by a community that had once respected me, sought my guidance, and trusted me. Now I was an outcast, a man they whispered about behind closed doors, a traitor to the faith I had once defended so passionately. But no matter how painful the rejection was, I couldn't deny what I had seen. I couldn't unsee the flames of hell, the anguish of the souls who had rejected Jesus. And I couldn't forget the love in his eyes when he told me that my life had been spared for a reason. I had been given another chance. Sarah stood by me, though I could see she was wrestling with her own doubts. She had spent just as many years as I had believing in the traditions we had built our lives upon, but little by little, she began to listen. She watched me as I spent hours reading not just the Torah, but the New Testament, scriptures I had once refused to touch. And one night, as we sat at the kitchen table, she asked me something that nearly brought me to tears. "Can I read it with you?" We started in the book of Isaiah, reading the prophecies I had known since childhood, but now I saw them with new eyes. Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, the one who was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. How had I never seen it before? It was Jesus. It had always been Jesus. As Sarah and I continued reading, the pieces started falling into place. The Messiah we had been waiting for had already come, but I had spent my entire life rejecting him. I felt a deep sorrow for all the years I had led others away from the truth, unknowingly steering them from the very one who had come to save us. But I also felt something else, hope, because as much as I had resisted him, Jesus had never stopped reaching for me. Sarah was quiet for a long time, turning the pages of the Bible with a distant look in her eyes. Then, finally, she whispered, "What do we do now?" It was the same question I had asked myself every night since my near-death experience. We had already lost so much: our community, my position, even parts of our own family. But deep down, I knew there was only one thing we could do. We had to share the truth. Slowly, a small group of seekers began to gather in our home. Some were former members of my congregation who had secretly begun questioning what they had always been taught. Others were strangers who had heard my testimony and wanted to know more. We read the scriptures together, prayed together, and for the first time, I felt what true faith was. It wasn't about tradition or status. It was about knowing God personally, but not everyone was willing to listen. My son, Daniel, stopped returning my calls. My daughter, Rebecca, told me she loved me, but couldn't expose her children to my dangerous beliefs. It broke my heart, but I understood. I had been just like them once, afraid of what the truth might cost me. I could only pray that one day they would seek it for themselves. Years passed, and though life was no longer what it once was, I had never felt closer to God. Sarah and I continued our small gatherings, and over time more people came. Some were skeptics, others were desperate for answers. But all of them had one thing in common. They were searching for something more. I could see in their eyes the same struggle I had once felt, the battle between what they had always been taught and what their hearts were beginning to realize. One night, a man I had known for years, a fellow rabbi who had once been my closest friend, came to visit me in secret. He sat across from me at the table, his hands trembling as he whispered, "David, I don't know what to believe anymore." My heart ached for him, because I knew exactly what he was feeling. We talked for hours, and by the time he left, I saw something in him that hadn't been there before. Hope. I knew then that this was why Jesus had spared my life, not to keep this truth to myself, but to share it with those who were willing to listen. Though I have lost much, I have gained everything. The peace I once searched for in religious rituals, I have now found in Jesus. The identity I once clung to so fiercely, I have now surrendered to something far greater. And the fear I once had of death, it's gone, because I know what waits for me when my time on this earth is done. I don't know who you are or where you stand in your faith, but I do know this. You are watching this video for a reason. Maybe, like me, you have doubts. Maybe you've spent your life convinced that Jesus isn't the answer. But what if he is? What if the truth you've been running from is the very thing you've been searching for all along? Don't wait until it's too late. Seek him now while there is still time. Because I promise you, the moment you see him for who he truly is, everything will change. If my story spoke to you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this video. Leave a comment. Subscribe for more testimonies like this one. Let me know if you have questions. I was given a second chance, and maybe this is yours. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. Hell is real. And the choice is ours to make. God bless you all.